Evan had always prided himself on his success. As the CEO of a rapidly growing tech company, he had climbed the corporate ladder with determination and perseverance. His early years had been marked by struggle, but over time his hard work had paid off. Now he had it all: money, respect, and a beautiful daughter. Still, there was one thing missing: the connection to someone who understood his challenges, who could share the journey with him. Despite the perks of his high-powered job, there were moments when Evan felt alone. The late nights spent at the office, the constant pressure to perform, and the endless stream of meetings had taken their toll on him. Being a single father added to the complexity. His daughter, Lily, was the light of his life, but raising her alone while managing a company was no easy feat. Some days, Evan wished he could find someone who could be his partner, someone who understood the weight of his responsibilities. It was during one of those long, exhausting days that Evan met Laura. She had just moved to the city, looking to start fresh after a painful divorce. Laura had always been the kind of person who preferred to keep to herself, but she couldn't help but feel drawn to the coffee shop across from her new apartment. That afternoon, the cafe was quieter than usual, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and the murmur of soft conversations. As she sipped her coffee, her gaze met Evan's, who was sitting alone at a table nearby, his eyes focused on the laptop in front of him but occasionally looking up. Evan wasn't the type to engage with strangers, especially in public spaces. But something about Laura's presence was different. There was an ease in the way she carried herself, a warmth that made the world seem just a little less cold. He had noticed the tiredness in her eyes, the kind that only comes from a life marked by personal struggle. Yet she wore it with quiet strength. Without much thought, he found himself standing up and walking over to her table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth but tinged with curiosity. "I couldn't help but notice you've been coming here often. Is this your usual spot?" Laura looked up, slightly startled by the sudden interruption, but smiled nonetheless. "Yeah, I guess so. Just moved here, so I'm trying to get a feel for the place. It's quiet, which I like." Evan sat down at the table without waiting for an invitation, his confident smile making it clear that he wasn't going to take no for an answer. "I can relate. I've been in this city for a while, but every now and then I find a place that feels like it's meant for me. I think this is one of those spots." Their conversation flowed effortlessly from there. They talked about their jobs, their lives, and the challenges they faced in their respective worlds. Laura listened intently, sharing her story of rebuilding after a divorce and trying to find a new sense of direction. Evan, in turn, opened up about his role as a single father and the complexities of balancing his career and family life. Though they came from different backgrounds, they found common ground in the shared experience of navigating difficult transitions. Over the next few weeks, Evan and Laura continued to meet at the coffee shop whenever their schedules allowed. Their friendship blossomed in these small, quiet moments. They shared laughs, swapped stories, and provided each other with the kind of support that only people who truly understood each other's struggles could give. Laura admired Evan's drive and commitment to his daughter, and Evan found a sense of calm in Laura's presence, something he had been lacking in his fast-paced world. But everything changed one evening, when Laura found herself in a situation that would test both of their lives in ways they never expected. She had been walking home from the coffee shop when she noticed a disturbance on the street corner. A man was yelling at a woman, his voice filled with anger and menace. The woman appeared frightened, backing away, but the man wasn't letting up. Without thinking, Laura rushed over to intervene. "Hey, leave her alone," Laura shouted, standing between the man and the woman. The man turned on Laura, his eyes narrowing in a mix of confusion and rage. "Mind your own business," he growled. But Laura wasn't going to back down. "I won't let you bully her," she said firmly. Her voice didn't tremble, even though she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The man shoved her aside, but Laura didn't flinch. She grabbed his arm and twisted it, trying to get him to back off. In that moment, everything seemed to move in slow motion. Laura wasn't trained for self-defense, but instinct kicked in. The man, now enraged, pushed her again, and this time, she lost her balance and fell to the ground. Just as she was trying to get back up, she heard a voice shouting from behind her. "Hey!" Evan appeared out of nowhere, his face set in a hard expression of determination. Before Laura could process what was happening, Evan was on the man, pushing him away and standing over Laura protectively. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Evan demanded. The man, now realizing he was facing someone much more powerful, staggered back. "This is none of your business," he spat. Evan didn't hesitate. With one swift movement, he had the man pinned against the wall. "It is now," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The man struggled for a moment but then seemed to recognize the futility of fighting someone like Evan. With a final shove, Evan released him and the man fled into the night, muttering curses under his breath. Laura sat up slowly, her heart still racing. She was shaken but grateful. She had never expected anyone to come to her aid in such a way, especially not from someone she had only just become friends with. "You saved me," Laura said, her voice barely a whisper. Evan crouched beside her, his expression softening as he looked at her. "I wasn't going to let him hurt you." There was a long silence between them, an unspoken understanding passing through the air. In that moment, Laura realized that Evan wasn't just a businessman or a single father. He was someone who would stand by her when it mattered most. And Evan, for the first time in a long while, felt a sense of connection with another person that went beyond the surface. Laura wasn't just a friend, she had become someone important to him. As they stood up together, Evan offered her a hand. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Laura took his hand, still a little shaken but grateful. "I am now," she replied. "Thank you, Evan, you didn't have to do that." He smiled, though there was a seriousness in his eyes. "I did. I couldn't let anything happen to you." From that moment forward, their friendship was no longer just about shared experiences or comforting conversations. It was something deeper, something that neither of them fully understood at the time. They had crossed a threshold together, and in doing so, they had unknowingly forged a bond that would define the rest of their lives. The days that followed the incident were a blur for both Laura and Evan. The adrenaline from the confrontation with the man had faded, leaving a lingering sense of unease, but also a bond neither of them had expected. Laura found herself thinking about Evan more than she had anticipated. There was something about him, something that made her feel safe, something that made her believe that the world wasn't as harsh as she often thought. For Evan, the feeling was mutual. He had seen Laura in a new light. She wasn't just the woman he'd casually met over coffee, someone with her own share of personal struggles. No, after that night, Laura had become someone he could trust, someone who was capable of standing up for others even when it meant putting herself in danger. It wasn't often Evan felt this way about someone, but Laura had become someone he didn't want to lose. She was his equal, his confidant, and now, she had earned his protection. It was a few weeks later when the unexpected happened. Evan's company had been facing significant challenges. There had been security breaches, leaks of sensitive information, and growing tensions within his team. With all of the mounting pressure, he knew it was only a matter of time before things escalated. As the CEO, he had to stay composed. But beneath the surface, the weight of it all was becoming unbearable. One morning, as Evan sat in his office reviewing security protocols, his phone rang. It was a call he had been dreading for weeks. His company's internal systems had been hacked, and the consequences were devastating. The hackers had managed to get access to some of their most confidential files, threatening to release the information unless a hefty ransom was paid. Evan was furious. He felt exposed, vulnerable, and worst of all, helpless. He had built this company from the ground up, and now, someone was trying to destroy it with a few clicks of a button. Panic set in as he tried to figure out what to do next. His mind raced as he thought of every possibility, but there was no immediate solution. He couldn't afford to wait, though. If he didn't act quickly, the damage could be catastrophic. It was then that he called Laura. "Laura, I need your help," he said, his voice a little more urgent than he intended. "Something's happened. There's a security breach in the company and I don't know how to fix it." Laura could hear the distress in his voice. "What's going on, Evan?" "Tell me." Evan explained the situation in detail, feeling more vulnerable than he'd ever felt before. He had always been the one who had all the answers, the one who handled crises with grace. But now he was lost. He didn't know how to navigate this new world of cyber attacks and digital extortion. "I'm coming over," Laura said without hesitation. "Don't worry. We'll figure this out together." When Laura arrived at his office that afternoon, she didn't waste any time. She immediately began looking through the company's files, assessing the breach. Though her expertise was in non-profit work, she had always been a quick study, and she had picked up a lot of skills over the years in crisis management. She had a sharp mind and a calm demeanor, two qualities that Evan appreciated more than he could put into words. For hours, they combed through the details of the hack, trying to determine the source and prevent further damage. Laura's mind worked quickly, finding solutions that Evan hadn't even considered. Every time they hit a wall, she would come up with a new strategy, a new angle to explore. Her confidence and resourcefulness were a lifeline for Evan, who was struggling to maintain his composure. But the hackers weren't done. The ransom demands continued to come in, each one more aggressive than the last. They had also started making threats not just to the company, but to Evan personally. One particularly chilling message warned that they knew about his daughter, Lily, and that she could be in danger if he didn't comply. It was a line Evan had hoped he would never have to face, someone threatening his child. The thought made him sick to his stomach. He had always been protective of Lily, and the idea that she might be in harm's way filled him with rage and terror. But there was no time to waste. The hackers were playing a dangerous game, and they had no idea who they were up against. "Evan, we can't let them win," Laura said firmly, as she noticed his hesitation. "We have to protect your company, and we have to protect Lily." Evan nodded, determined. "You're right. I won't let them get away with this." For the next several days, Laura stayed by Evan's side. Together, they worked tirelessly to secure the company's data and track down the hackers. It was grueling work, long hours spent in front of screens, but neither of them complained. As the pressure mounted, their bond only deepened. Laura wasn't just helping Evan with the company. She was helping him deal with his fears, his uncertainties, and his growing sense of helplessness. At one point, while they were reviewing the hackers' demands, Evan received another call. This time it was a voice he recognized, an old business associate who had once been a trusted member of his team. The associate had offered his help in the past, but after a falling out, Evan had distanced himself from him. Now it seemed he was back with an offer to help Evan through this crisis. "Evan," the man said, "I think we both know I have the resources you need. All you have to do is let me help you fix this, and you can avoid any further damage. You don't want your company to be in the headlines, do you?" Evan's heart sank. He had suspected for a while that something wasn't right, and this call confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't just about money. It was about something far more sinister. The hacker wasn't acting alone. And this old associate of his? He might have been involved in ways Evan couldn't yet understand. "I don't need your help," Evan said coldly, his voice unwavering. "Stay out of this." The conversation ended abruptly, and Evan felt a surge of anger. He had been betrayed once, and he wasn't about to let it happen again. This time, he would take control. But he couldn't do it alone. "Laura, we've got a bigger problem than I thought," Evan said, his voice tight. "I think someone I trusted might be involved in this." Laura's eyes narrowed. "I knew it. We need to be careful, Evan. These people don't just want money, they want power. They're playing a game, and we're the pawns." Evan nodded, the gravity of the situation sinking in. It wasn't just his company on the line. It was his entire future. But with Laura by his side, he felt more certain than ever that he wouldn't go down without a fight. Together, they would face whatever came next. The days that followed were full of tension. Evan and Laura had settled into a routine of trying to fix the damage done by the hackers. But the pressure was relentless. Evan's mind kept going back to the threat the hackers had made against his daughter Lily. He couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was growing more dangerous by the hour. Every phone call, every knock on the door made him feel like he was being watched. Evan was used to stress, but this felt different. This wasn't just about a business failure. It was about his family's safety. He found himself waking up in the middle of the night, checking the locks on the door and listening for any strange noises outside. His daughter Lily had no idea just how close they had come to disaster. She was still too young to understand the gravity of the situation. But Evan knew. He knew that if anything happened to her, he couldn't forgive himself. It wasn't just the hackers who were a threat anymore. As the days wore on, Evan began to suspect that there was someone closer to him than he had originally realized who was behind this entire ordeal. His former associate had made a strange offer to help him, but Evan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than just a business rivalry. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that this person had been planning something for a long time. Laura had been an incredible help throughout this entire ordeal. She wasn't just a friend anymore, she had become his rock. She stayed with him day and night, poring over the data, tracking down leads, and offering comfort whenever the weight of the situation became too much. Evan had never been one to let others in, but Laura's steady presence made him feel less alone. She had shown him time and again that she wasn't just someone who could talk the talk, she could walk the walk. One evening, after another long day of trying to get ahead of the hackers' demands, Laura suggested they take a break and get some fresh air. Evan was reluctant at first. The work was never ending, and he couldn't afford to lose focus. But Laura insisted. "Come on," she said, her eyes soft with understanding. "You can't fix everything in one night. Just take a moment to breathe. We need to stay sharp for whatever's coming next." Evan hesitated but eventually agreed. They stepped outside, and for the first time in days, Evan felt like he could breathe a little easier. The cool evening air calmed his nerves, and for a brief moment, the chaos that had consumed his life seemed far away. They sat on a park bench, both silent at first. It was a peaceful moment, one that Evan had been craving for a long time. He turned to Laura, finally speaking up. "I don't know what to do next. Every step I take feels like it just makes things worse," Evan confessed, his voice raw with frustration. "I've built this company from the ground up. It's my life, and now I feel like it's all slipping away." Laura listened, her gaze focused on the path ahead. She understood the weight of what he was saying. She knew how much his company meant to him, how much he had sacrificed for his success. But she also knew that this wasn't just about a business. It was about Evan's peace of mind, his safety, and his family. "You're not alone in this," she said softly, her voice calm but firm. "We'll get through it together, but you have to trust that you can't do it all on your own. You need to let others help you, Evan." He nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. It was hard for him to admit, but he realized that Laura was right. He couldn't carry the burden of this crisis alone. If he was going to protect his company and his family, he needed to trust others to help him. He needed to stop fighting this battle by himself. The next day, as they continued to work through the hackers' demands, something unexpected happened. Evan received another phone call, this time from a person he hadn't heard from in years. It was the hacker. "I hope you're enjoying the game, Evan," the voice on the other end said, his tone dripping with mockery. "You're running out of time. If you don't give me what I want, I'll make sure everything you've built comes crashing down. And as for your daughter, well, let's just say she might make a nice target." Evan's blood ran cold. The hacker knew about Lily. He knew just how to push Evan's buttons. The threat felt real now, and for the first time, Evan felt his control slipping away. "Leave her out of this," Evan said through gritted teeth. "You're messing with the wrong person. I'll make sure you regret this." The hacker laughed. "I don't think you fully understand the situation, Evan. You're at my mercy now. There's nothing you can do." The call ended and Evan's hands shook with anger. He turned to Laura, who had been listening quietly. Her expression was one of calm determination, but Evan could see the concern in her eyes. "We have to act fast," Laura said, her voice steady. "This person is dangerous. We can't wait around for them to make the next move." Evan nodded, his mind racing. He couldn't let this person take away everything he had worked for. But the hacker was playing a much bigger game than he had anticipated. And the more Evan tried to fight back, the deeper he was getting pulled into a world he didn't fully understand. Later that night, after hours of digging through more data, they found a breakthrough. The hacker had left behind a digital footprint, a trace of their location. It was a small lead, but it was enough to make Evan feel like they had a chance. "Let's go," Evan said, his voice firm. "We're not backing down." "Not now." Laura didn't hesitate. She knew that they had no time to waste. The hackers' threats were escalating, and if they didn't act now, there was no telling what could happen next. They quickly gathered their things, and Evan made arrangements for Lily to stay with a trusted friend. He couldn't risk her being anywhere near the confrontation. The weight of what they were about to do hung heavily in the air, but neither of them said a word. There was no room for fear or hesitation now. Evan and Laura drove through the night, their minds focused on one goal: finding the hacker and stopping the damage before it got worse. The adrenaline of the past few days had kept them going, but now that they were closer to their target, the weight of the situation seemed to settle in. Laura sat beside Evan, her eyes scanning the road, trying to focus on the task ahead. She had always been a problem solver, someone who could find a way out of any situation. But this was different. This wasn't just a corporate crisis, it was personal. The hacker wasn't just targeting Evan's company. They had threatened his daughter, and that was something Laura couldn't ignore. Evan's grip on the steering wheel tightened as he thought about Lily. She was safe now, staying with a close friend, but that didn't ease the constant knot in his stomach. He couldn't help but replay the hacker's words in his mind. Your daughter might make a nice target. The thought made him sick, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task ahead. He couldn't afford to get distracted. We're almost there, Evan said, his voice low, almost to himself. Laura nodded, her eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. They had tracked the hacker's location to an old industrial building on the outskirts of the city. It was a place no one would think to look, isolated, abandoned, and hidden in plain sight. If the hacker had planned this, they had chosen the perfect location to lay low. As they pulled up to the building, Evan turned off the engine. The silence of the night was deafening. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. They had no idea what they were walking into, but they knew they couldn't turn back now. This is it, Evan said, his voice tight with determination. Stay close. We don't know what we're dealing with. Laura nodded, her expression unreadable. I'm with you. Let's do this. They got out of the car and the cold air hit them like a wave. The building loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. The only light came from a single street lamp near the entrance. They moved cautiously toward the door, trying not to make any noise. Every step felt like it echoed in the stillness. Evan motioned for Laura to follow him as he approached the door. It was slightly ajar, the lock broken. They exchanged a glance before pushing it open. The creaking of the door was loud in the quiet night, but it didn't stop them. They stepped inside, their footsteps muffled by the dust on the floor. The building was empty, except for the faint hum of old machinery in the distance. It smelled musty, like it hadn't been used in years. Evan's eyes scanned the dark corners, his senses on high alert. He had faced corporate rivals, angry clients, and difficult situations, but this was different. This felt dangerous in a way he couldn't explain. They moved deeper into the building, their footsteps slow and deliberate. The only sound was the faint rustling of paper and the distant hum of electricity. It was eerie, and Evan's thoughts kept drifting back to the hacker. Who were they? What did they want? And why had they threatened Lily? As they reached a large open space in the center of the building, they heard a noise, a faint tapping sound. Evan's heart skipped a beat. It was coming from the far end of the room. He motioned for Laura to stay behind him as he cautiously approached. The tapping grew louder, and as Evan rounded a corner, he finally saw the source. It was a computer sitting on an old desk, the screen flickering with lines of code. The hacker was there. They were close. Evan stepped forward, his hand reaching for his phone, ready to call for backup. But before he could make the call, he heard a voice behind him. Not so fast, Evan froze. He knew that voice. It was the voice of the man he had once called a trusted colleague. The man who had made that strange offer to help him. Evan turned slowly, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. You? Evan said, his voice cold. The man, now standing in the shadows, smirked. You didn't think I'd let you get away that easily, did you? Laura stepped forward, her eyes scanning the man with a mixture of confusion and anger. What is this? Why are you doing this? The man chuckled, his voice filled with bitterness. You think this is about money? This is bigger than that. You've been too focused on the wrong things, Evan. This isn't just about taking your company down. It's about taking everything from you. Evan's mind raced. He had suspected something was off with his former colleague, but this was more than he could have imagined. The man had been orchestrating everything behind the scenes, pulling strings, manipulating events. And now he was standing right in front of him. You were the one behind the hack, Evan said, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief and anger. All of this, the threats, the ransom, it was all you? The man nodded, a twisted smile spreading across his face. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. You think you can just run your company without consequences? I've seen it all. Your success, your arrogance. I've been trying to teach you a lesson, Evan. You've had it easy for too long. Laura stepped forward, her voice steady but full of defiance. You don't get to ruin people's lives just because of your own bitterness. You've crossed a line. The man's eyes flickered with annoyance. You don't get it, do you? This isn't personal. It's just business. And I'm about to make sure you pay for all the people you've stepped on to get where you are. Evan's blood boiled. He couldn't believe the arrogance of the man standing before him. But there was no time for anger now. He had to stop him. He had to protect Lily and make sure this nightmare ended. Enough, Evan shouted. We're done here. The man's smile faltered for a moment, and Evan took advantage of the brief distraction. With a swift motion, he lunged forward, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it behind his back. The man yelped in pain, but Evan didn't let go. You think you can get away with this? Evan said, his voice low and menacing. The man struggled, but Evan held him firmly. You've made a lot of mistakes. This is where it ends. Laura moved quickly, pulling out her phone and dialing the authorities. She didn't hesitate, knowing that this was their only chance to end this. They couldn't let the man get away, not after everything he had done. The sound of sirens grew louder in the distance. The man's face twisted with rage as he realized there was no escape. You'll regret this, he spat. But Evan wasn't worried. He had finally taken control. This wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, protecting the people he loved, and making sure that justice was served. As the authorities arrived and took the man away, Evan and Laura stood there in silence, both trying to process what had just happened. The danger was over, but the impact of everything that had transpired would stay with them forever. Evan turned to Laura, his expression one of gratitude. Thank you, he said, his voice sincere. I couldn't have done this without you. Laura smiled, her eyes soft. We did it together, and for the first time in a long time, Evan felt a sense of peace. He had faced the worst of his fears and come out on the other side. And with Laura by his side, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The days after the confrontation were a blur for Evan and Laura. The threat that had loomed over their heads for so long had finally been eliminated, but the aftermath was far from easy. Evan had spent days sorting through the legal process, making sure that his company was secure and that the hacker, as well as his accomplices, were held accountable. There were many sleepless nights ahead, but as the dust began to settle, he found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. Laura had stayed by his side throughout it all. She had been there for him in ways he hadn't expected, stepping in as both a friend and a partner when he needed her the most. Evan had always been self-sufficient, but Laura had shown him that there was power in letting others in sharing the load, and in trusting someone with your most vulnerable moments. Though Evan had been through a storm, he couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of relief. The hacker, the betrayal, the constant tension, it was all over. But even with everything that had happened, there was one thing that Evan couldn't shake: the growing connection between him and Laura. It wasn't just friendship anymore. It felt like something more, something he hadn't expected to find. Evan had always been cautious with his emotions, especially after his divorce. He'd built walls around himself and his heart, protecting both from the pain of disappointment. But Laura had slipped past those walls without him even realizing it. And now, as the situation started to return to some semblance of normal, Evan found himself grappling with what this newfound connection really meant. One evening, after the last of the legal paperwork was completed and his company was back on track, Evan and Laura sat together at the same coffee shop where they had first met. The place felt different now, quieter, warmer, like the calm after a storm. Evan sipped his coffee slowly, his mind lost in thought. Laura sat across from him, her gaze soft, waiting for him to speak. You know, Evan began, his voice thoughtful, I don't think I've ever really thanked you properly for everything you've done for me. He paused, looking at her as he spoke. I don't think I could have gotten through this without you. Laura smiled, her eyes filled with understanding. You don't have to thank me, Evan. I was just doing what anyone would do for a friend. Evan shook his head, setting his cup down. It's more than that. You didn't just help me with the company or the crisis. You were there when I needed someone. You stood by me even when things got tough. That's not something I take lightly. There was a moment of silence between them, the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Laura's expression softened and she leaned forward, her voice gentle. I didn't do it because I had to, Evan, she said. I did it because I care about you. I've seen the kind of person you are. You're strong, you're capable, but you don't have to carry everything on your own. Sometimes it's okay to let others in. I'm happy I could help. But what matters most is that you've learned to trust again. Trust in yourself and trust in the people who care about you. Evan looked at her, his chest tightening with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. It was vulnerability. It was the realization that she was right. He had been so focused on doing everything on his own, on protecting himself from hurt, that he had closed himself off to the people who mattered most. But now with Laura, it felt different. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't alone. Laura's words settled in his mind. Trust. That was what it came down to. Trusting someone, letting them in, and not letting past hurts control the present. And as Evan sat there with her, he knew that he didn't want to let this chance slip away. Not with Laura. Not after everything they had been through. "You're right," Evan finally said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been running from trust for a long time, but I don't want to keep running anymore." Laura's smile widened and Evan's heart gave a sudden unfamiliar leap. In that moment he realized just how much he had come to depend on her. She had been the one constant, the one person who had never wavered even when things seemed impossible. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Evan focused on the final stages of recovery for his company, overseeing new security measures to ensure that no such attack would happen again. Laura continued to lend her support, offering advice and helping him navigate the new challenges that arose. But amid the work, something shifted between them. They spent more time together, not just working, but sharing moments, enjoying each other's company in ways that felt natural. They laughed together over lunch, shared long conversations over coffee, and found solace in one another's presence. One evening, after a particularly long day, they walked out of Evan's office together. The sky was clear, the stars twinkling overhead. The world felt quieter now, as though the chaos of the past few weeks had finally faded into the background. "I've been thinking," Evan said, breaking the silence as they walked side by side. "I've been through a lot these past few months, but the one thing that stands out the most is you. What we've been through, it's made me realize just how important you are to me." Laura glanced over at him, her heart skipping a beat at the sincerity in his voice. "Evan, you don't have to say anything. I'm just glad you're okay." But Evan didn't let her brush it off. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his eyes steady and full of conviction. "No, Laura, I need to say this. I care about you. More than I ever thought I could care about anyone, and I want to be there for you, just like you've been there for me." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment Laura didn't know what to say. She had always cared for Evan, but hearing him say it aloud, hearing the raw honesty in his voice made her heart swell. She stepped closer, looking into his eyes. "I care about you too, Evan," she said softly. "I always have." And in that moment everything changed. They had been through so much together, and now, standing there, it was clear that they weren't just two people caught in a whirlwind of crises. They were two people who had found something real, something worth holding on to. They didn't need to rush into anything. They didn't need to have all the answers right then and there. But they knew one thing for sure. They were in this together, and that was enough. The weeks that followed saw Evan and Laura navigating not only their professional lives, but their personal connection as well. They became partners not just in business, but in life. Evan learned to trust again, and Laura showed him that sometimes the most important thing was not just surviving the storms, but learning to weather them together. Evan's company continued to thrive, and with Laura by his side, he was no longer just a man driven by ambition. He was a man who understood the value of love, trust, and human connection. And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly at peace. Weeks passed, and the world around Evan and Laura began to settle into a new rhythm. Life had returned to some semblance of normalcy, but neither of them could shake the feeling that their lives had shifted in profound ways. The intensity of the past months had changed them, both as individuals and as a team. They had weathered storms together, and in doing so, they had built something strong. What started as a professional relationship had blossomed into a deeper connection, one that neither of them had anticipated, but both of them now cherished. Evan found himself looking at his company from a different perspective. After the hacker's betrayal and the emotional toll it had taken on him, he began to appreciate the work he did with his team more deeply. He had always been driven by the goal of success, but now he found himself more focused on the people around him, his employees, his friends, and especially Laura. He was no longer just the CEO of a company. He was a leader, someone who understood the importance of relationships, trust, and loyalty. Laura, too, had found a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. She had been through her own struggles in life, but being with Evan had helped her open up in ways she hadn't expected. She had always been independent, but the connection she had with him was different. It wasn't about needing someone. It was about choosing to be with someone who made her feel seen and valued. She had spent so long building walls around her heart, afraid to let anyone in, but with Evan, those walls had come down, one brick at a time. One evening, as the sun began to set, Evan and Laura sat together in a quiet park near Evan's office. The world around them was calm, the air warm with the promise of summer. They had decided to take a break from work, to spend time together without the distractions of the office or the lingering stresses of the past months. Evan leaned back on the bench, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was one of those moments where time seemed to slow, and everything felt right. Laura sat next to him, her eyes on the sky, a soft smile on her lips. The city around them hummed with life, but in this moment, it felt like they were in their own little world. "You know," Evan began, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking a lot lately, about everything that's happened, about how much has changed in such a short time." Laura turned to him, her expression open and curious. "What do you mean?" Evan glanced over at her, his eyes full of gratitude. "I used to think I had everything figured out. I thought that success, that building something great was all that mattered. But I've realized that it's not enough. There's so much more to life than business deals and bottom lines. There's love, there's trust, and there's the kind of connection that makes everything else worth it." Laura's heart swelled as she listened to him. She had seen Evan's transformation firsthand. He had always been driven, but now he was beginning to understand the deeper meaning behind the work he did. The shift in his perspective wasn't just about his company. It was about him as a person. He was no longer just a man defined by his title. He was someone who had learned to value the things that truly mattered. "I've learned a lot from you, Evan," Laura said softly. "You've taught me that it's okay to let go of the past and trust again. I used to hold on to everything, every mistake, every heartbreak. But you've shown me that it's okay to move forward, to build something new." Evan reached out and gently took her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. "I'm glad I've been able to show you that," he said, his voice warm. "But you've taught me something too. You've shown me that it's okay to let people in, to share the weight of everything. I've spent so much of my life thinking I had to do it all on my own. But now I know that I don't have to. I've got you by my side." For a moment, there was a silence between them, but it was the kind of silence that felt comforting rather than awkward. They didn't need to say anything more. They both knew that their connection was deeper than words could express. What they had was real, and it was something they would protect no matter what. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the park around them began to empty. People walked by, lost in their own worlds, but Evan and Laura remained where they were, content in each other's presence. They had come so far together, through the challenges, the fears, and the uncertainties. And now, they stood on the brink of something new, something neither of them could have predicted but both of them wanted. Weeks turned into months, and Evan's company continued to thrive. The lessons he had learned during the crisis stayed with him, shaping the way he ran his business and interacted with the people around him. He was more focused on building a culture of trust and respect, not just for his employees but for himself. He had come to realize that the true measure of success wasn't in profits or titles. It was in the relationships you built and the impact you had on those around you. Laura, too, had found her own way forward. She had been a guiding force in Evan's life, but she had also carved out a space for herself, one where she could continue to grow and learn. She had always been passionate about helping others, and now she was taking steps to create something of her own. She had always put her own dreams on the back burner, but with Evan's support, she was beginning to pursue them in earnest. One evening, as they sat together at their favorite cafe, Laura turned to Evan with a look of determination in her eyes. "I've been thinking," she said. "I want to start my own nonprofit. I want to help people the way I've helped you. I know it's going to be a lot of work, but I feel like it's something I need to do." Evan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I think that's an incredible idea, Laura. You've always had a heart for helping others. I'll support you every step of the way." Laura smiled back, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you. Evan, you've been more than just a partner, you've been a true friend. As the months passed, Laura's nonprofit began to take shape, and Evan continued to grow his company. Both of them focused on building something meaningful. They had both come so far, and it was clear that their journey was far from over. But no matter what challenges lay ahead, they knew they would face them together. And in that quiet cafe, as they sat side by side, they both realized something. They had built something far greater than just a business or a project. They had built a life together. They had come this far together, and there was no turning back. Months passed since Evan and Laura had faced the storm together. The journey they'd embarked on had not only brought them closer, but had also opened their eyes to the true meaning of partnership. They had faced betrayals, hackers, and personal challenges that tested their strength and resilience. But now, as they moved forward, the future felt more promising than ever. Their bond had deepened in ways neither of them had expected, and both of them had grown from the experience. Evan's company was thriving again. The lessons learned from the crisis had changed the way he ran things. His leadership style was no longer just about results. It was about creating a culture of transparency, trust, and collaboration. He had learned that it wasn't enough to just succeed in business. The true success lay in the people he worked with, the relationships he nurtured, and the impact they made in the world. Laura's nonprofit was also making waves. She had always had a heart for helping others, but now she had a platform to make a real difference. The work wasn't always easy, and there were times when the road ahead seemed uncertain. But Laura's passion and drive kept her going, and she knew that the impact she was having, even if small at first, was worth every ounce of effort. Though their paths had started in different directions, Evan and Laura had found common ground, a shared vision of making a difference, not just in their own lives, but in the lives of others. And as time passed, they realized they were stronger together, their individual strengths complementing each other in ways neither of them could have anticipated. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of Evan's apartment, the city skyline stretched out before them. The lights twinkled like stars, and the air was warm with the promise of a new season. The past few months had been filled with hard work, but tonight was different. There was a sense of peace, a quiet contentment that filled the space between them. Evan turned to Laura, his gaze softening as he spoke. "You know, I've been thinking about how far we've come, from where we started to where we are now. It's incredible." Laura smiled, her eyes meeting his. "It really is. I never could have imagined any of this when we first met. But I think I've learned more about myself and about you than I ever expected." Evan reached over, taking her hand in his. "I've learned so much too, about trust, about love, and about what really matters." For a moment, neither of them said anything. They just sat there, basking in the quiet of the evening, the weight of their shared experiences hanging between them like a warm blanket. Life hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And with Laura by his side, Evan realized that he no longer feared the future. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As the days passed, Evan and Laura continued to build their lives. Their connection grew stronger, and so did their sense of purpose. They had both learned to lean on each other, to be vulnerable, and to trust in the strength of their bond. But they also knew that they had to face challenges that would come their way. One of those challenges came unexpectedly. Evan's company, while thriving, had caught the attention of some powerful competitors. They weren't the kind of competitors who would play fair, and soon Evan found himself facing a new kind of battle. A battle that didn't involve hackers or sabotage, but rather corporate rivalry and cutthroat tactics. Evan had always known that his success would attract attention, but he hadn't expected this. The competitors were relentless, using underhanded tactics to try and outmaneuver him. They tried to undermine his credibility, spread rumors, and use legal loopholes to try to slow him down. At first, Evan felt a sense of déjà vu, a feeling of being trapped in a familiar pattern. But this time he wasn't alone. Laura was by his side every step of the way. She had always been a steady source of support, but now more than ever her wisdom and perspective helped Evan navigate this new challenge. They began strategizing together, looking for ways to outsmart their rivals without compromising their values. Laura reminded Evan that winning didn't always mean playing by their rules. It meant staying true to their principles. It wasn't easy, but Evan found strength in the fact that he wasn't facing this battle alone. Together, he and Laura were able to outmaneuver their competitors, turning the tables in their favor. It wasn't about defeating the other side. It was about staying true to their vision and showing that integrity and trust were the real keys to success. As the battle continued, Evan found himself relying on Laura more and more, not just for support but for her insight and strategic thinking. Her perspective was invaluable, and together, they made a great team. She didn't just help him in business, she helped him in life. The experience only strengthened their bond, reinforcing the lessons they had learned over the past year. The hacker, the betrayal, the personal struggles, all of it had led them to this point. They had grown stronger, more resilient, and more committed to their shared future. After the dust settled from the corporate rivalry, Evan and Laura found themselves at another crossroads. They had achieved so much together, but there was still one thing neither of them had fully addressed. Their feelings for each other had deepened, but neither of them had truly acknowledged just how much they had come to mean to one another. One evening, as they sat in the same cafe where they had shared countless conversations before, Evan looked at Laura, his expression serious yet gentle.